All right, I will say good morning. The beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Kuf Lamed Gimel 133. And we are picking up Emir Hashem at Rava Amar on 132b, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 lines up from the bottom. Our shir this morning, we thank our weekly sponsor, Mrs. Selma Wolf, for dedicating all of the shiurim this week in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for her daughter, Naomi Bas Sarah. And we hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, she together with Kol Cholei Yisrael have a complete and enduring refuah. And I will say with that, let us begin. Really incredible daf. So we're still continuing on our whole discussion about Mila Docha Shabbos, Mila Shalo Bismana Docha Shabbos, Mila Docha Tzaras. So continuing on the same theme. So Rabbi Amar kind of left off in the middle of this yesterday. Rava Amar. Mila Bismana Docha Shabbos, Mila Bismana Docha Lo Tzricha Kra. So we'll say, in fact, Rava says that a Mila Bismana sets aside the prohibition of tzaras. Remember again, one of the things we've been dealing with is this idea that there's a pasuk that says, Hishamer benega tzaras. Be careful with tzaras. What do you mean be careful with tzaras? You can't cut off your tzaras. So Rav is saying over here, one of the things that we learned was the notion that Mila is docha tzaras, which means that if I have tzaras on the makom mila, so l'meis again, even though by giving the bris I'm going to remove the tzaras, I'm still allowed to do so. So Rav says it doesn't even need a pasuk. Mikal v'chomer asu, you can learn from Mikal v'chomer. Umar Shabbos techamira docha tzaras l'kol shekain. If mila is docha Shabbos and Shabbos is chomer, so if mila is docha Shabbos, it's certainly docha tzaras. Amar Safra l'Rava mimai de Shabbos chamira. How do you know that Shabbos is more chomer than tzaras? Maybe tzaras is more chomer. After all, why? Shekain doches havoda. Because remember, we're going to say tzaras is docha avoda, va'avoda doches Shabbos, and avoda is docha Shabbos. To which we said, no. Hasam la mishum dechamira tzaras. They both say the fact it's not really that tzaras is docha Shabbos, docha avoda. Rather, what's happening over here? Ela mishum de gavrahu de lo chazi. Because we both remember again the reason. See, it's not that tzaras is docha avoda. It's just that a kohen with tzaras is a balmum, and a kohen who is a balmum who is blemished may not do the avoda. So you don't necessarily know that tzaras is more chomer, so to speak, than avoda. I v'yakotz berasa v'yavod. So, but why? We'll say, why not just have the kohen cut off his tzaras and let him go ahead and do the avoda? To which the Gemara says, because at the end of the day, he still needs to go to the mikvah. So teinach ben goyim timeim, the goyim torah ma'ikel meimar. So that's true. Rabbi say, if the kohen has a nega, has a tzaras that's tameh, but if he has tzaras that is tahor, what is it? A sin. Now this is actually quite fascinating. What the Gemara is saying is like this. Remember, there are different forms of. Let me say it differently. There are different types of lesions. The Gemara is calling every lesion tzaras. But lamaisa, there are some types of lesions that are problematic, and there are other types of lesions which are not. So what the Gemara is saying is something very interesting. If he happens to have a tahar lesion, why can't the kohen just go ahead and do the avoda like that? But say to which the Gemara is saying, because a kohen with any type of lesion is considered to be a balmum. This is very interesting. So if a kohen has a lesion, that's a non-saras lesion, but a lesion nevertheless, halacha lamaisa, he can't do the avoda because he's a balmum. To which the Gemara says, I'm sorry, Heicha Arminan da Aseh V'Dachi Lo Saseh. So we'll say, what the Gemara is suggesting is as follows. Shouldn't a kohen be able to cut off his tzaras in order to go ahead and do the avoda? After all, again, let the aseh, the positive commandment of avoda, set aside the lo saseh of tzaras removal, and let the kohen cut off his lesion if he wants to and do the avoda. So both say to which the Gemara says a very yisodistic idea. When do we say Heicha Aminan da Aseh V'Dachi Lo Saseh? When do we say that an aseh, a positive commandment, sets aside a prohibition? Here we go. Kigon mila betzaras ina mitzitzis ukilayim. Both say the example would be, let's say, removing tzaras with bris milah, or making tzitzis out of shatnez. Deba'ina demisakir lav kamoki aseh. Hacha ba'ina demisakir lav lo kamokim aseh. Both say it's a very important yisod. When do we say aseh docha lo saseh, that a positive commandment can set aside a prohibition? Only when there's simultaneity. Everything is happening at the same time. The aseh and the lo saseh are occurring at the same time. So, for example, we'll say bris milah is a perfect example of this. A baby has tsaras on the arla, on the foreskin. So now I have a problem. I have an aseh of milah, a lo saseh of not removing tsaras. So what do I say? The positive commandment of milah overrides the lo saseh of tsaras removal. And why can that do that? Because they're happening at the same time. You are allowed to make tzitzis out of shatnez. Why? Because the aseh of tzitzis is doche the lo aseh of shatnez. Why? Because at the moment that you fulfill the aseh of tzitzis, that you're tying the strings onto the beged, that's the very moment ultimately that you're in violation of shatnez. I will say that's different than the Kohen case. You want the Kohen to cut off his lesion, his saras, to do the avodah. What's the problem? At the moment he cuts off the lesion, that's the lo saseh. But the aseh of avodah doesn't come until later on. I will say a very important yesod. Although we accept the principle of aseh doche lo saseh, that's only when there's simultaneity. To which the Gemara says, "V'hadirava v'Rav Safra tanoihi." These statements of Rav Safra are machlokes tanoim. To which the Gemara says, "Desanya basar v'afa pishiyesham b'heres yimal divrei Yoshia." So we'll say the pasuk says basar, and basar I learned from you could circumcise the child even if there is saras on the arla. That's Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yonasan Omer eno tzarich Shabbos chamura docha tzaras lo kol shekein. So ultimately, again, Shabbos chamura docha tzaras lo kol shekein. Almost you don't even need the drasha. He says ultimately, again, if Mila has the ability to set aside Shabbos, which is chamur, it certainly has the ability to set aside tzaras, which is not chamur. So we'll say, as we already said yesterday, so lemaisa again, so everyone's agreeing that halacha lemaisa, a Mila bismana is docha Shabbos. That's number one, what everybody agrees on. Number two, everyone is also agreeing that Mila is docha tzaras. We're only just the machlokes about where we learn everything else from. Beautiful. Weiter. Amar basar afa pishei sham baharas yimal di Rabbi Yoshia. So we just said, quoting again, Rabbi Yoshia said, the fact that the pasuk says basar, flesh, that teaches me that Allah lamaisa, even if there is tzaras on the makom Mila, on the arla, you still do the Mila. I halam alikra. Why do I need a pasuk? Davar she'in miskavinu. But we'll say, again, this is davar she'in miskavin. In this case, my intention is not to remove the tzaras. What's my intention? It's my intention to give a bris milah. So if it's a davar she'in miskavin, then why do I need a pasuk at all? Amar Abaye lo nitzcha ela Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, I will say this only is necessary for Rabbi Yehuda. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Amar davar she'in miskavin aser. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that a davar she'in miskavin is aser. Rava Amar afilu tim Reb Shimon. It could even be necessary for Reb Shimon. Why? Mod Reb Shimon b'psikreisha v'lo yamus. Because Reb say this isn't just a davar she'eino miskaven, right? This isn't just. Remember, Reb say davar she'eino miskaven means you do something without, and it has like an unintentional byproduct. This is not a davar she'eino miskaven. Reb say this is what we call a psikreisha. Psikreisha means when you do something that has a definitive secondary result. So we'll say in this case over here, so like remember the paradigmatic case of davar she'eino miskaven is I do action A, and A may or may not result in B. But even if it does result in B, it's not really what I want. We'll say, right, so what's the classic example? On Shabbos, I'm sitting in my backyard, I want to move a chair from point A to point B. The chair is too heavy to carry, so I'm going to drag it. When I drag it, it may make a furrow. Making a furrow on Shabbos is problematic. So again, if you hold, like Rabbi Yehuda, davar she'eino miskaven is mutter. So sorry, Rabbi Shimon, davar she'eino miskaven is mutter. So lemaisa, again, I say, okay, that's not my intention. My intention is to get the chair from point A to point B, and even if a furrow does happen, it's not my intention. I will say, a psikreisha means it's not that it may happen, it will happen. And it appears that more people agree, or everyone agrees, that a psikreisha is going to be answered. So when you do a bris milah, and there is tzaras on the makom milah, that's not a davar she'eino miskaven, that's a psikreisha. So it's va'abai lesle haisvar. Does Abai not agree to this? Va'abai v'rav davar tarbayu. Mov Rabbi Shimon b'psikreisha v'lo yamos. Right, the Rabbi Shimon agrees that Allah chalamayis psikreisha is going to be aser. To which the Gemara says, you're right, Basar Deshame Merabba Svara. You're right, Inachinami Abaye changed his position after he heard this statement from Rabbah. So the Gemara, therefore I just want to be clear. The result is the same. You can do a milah even when there is tsaras on the foreskin, on the arla. The difference just is, whereas we thought that at first you could go ahead and learn it out from a Kal V'chomer, or that as the Davar She'eino Miskavin, Kamashma, no, I actually need a pasuk. And the pasuk is basar. You could remove that flesh no matter what. It doesn't make a difference what's on it, what's not on it, you could remove it. Others have this conversation of Abai Rava in a different context. Hishar ben Agatzaras, Lishmar va'od v'lasos. Shabbos says, so the pasuk says, you shall be careful, right? You shall be careful. Hishar ben Agatzaras, Lishmar va'od v'lasos. Be careful with the tzaras lesion, lishmar ma'od, to guard it carefully and to do. Lasos iata oses. Well, so listen to this. You cannot do anything actively to remove tzaras from your body. Listen to this. Aval ose ata b'sif shal al gabi raglo, or b'mot shal gabi ksefo, b'im avra avra. So we'll say this is fascinating. But what can you do? Let's say I have tzaras on my foot. So we'll say, so what's the issue? If I put on my sandal, I put on my shoe, so it's possible that the straps are going to rub against the tzaras lesion and may remove the lesion. Or for that matter, if I'm working in the field, right, and I need to transport my farming utensils, I could put, or the staff, I could put it on, let's say the tzaras is on my shoulder, and I put it on my shoulder, so that I could rub against my shoulder and remove the tzaras lesion. So we'll say this is very interesting. So the Gemara says, you can't do anything to actively remove tzaras from your body, but if in the course of normal daily activities, you do something that can remove the tzaras from your body, you are not obligated to not engage. You're not obligated to not engage in that activity of daily living because it may lead to the removal of tzaras. So again, for example, one more time, I have tzaras on my foot. If I put on my shoe, it could be the shoe will rub against the tzaras and remove the tzaras. I might think, okay, you can't wear shoes. You can't wear shoes. After all, again, that may remove the tzaras. No, I can wear the shoes because that's an activity of daily living. If the tzaras comes off, the tzaras comes off. So the Gemara says, so why do I need a pasuk to teach me that? Davar She'eino Miskavin. Of course I got to put on my shoe. Because remember again, what's my intention when I put on my shoe? What's my intention? To put on my shoe. So the mice again, even if incidentally the tzaras comes off, that's not my kavanah. It's Davar She'eino Miskavin. But Davar She'eino Miskavin mutar. Amar Abaye lo nitzricha ela Rabbi Yehuda Davar She'eino Miskavin aser. So Abaye says, no, because there is a position of Rabbi Yehuda. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a Davar She'eino Miskavin is aser, would agree based on the pasuk that you could put your shoe on. V'Rava Amar afilu teim Rabbi Shimon. It could even be Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon b'sikrei shavalo yamos. Because I will say, remember again, it could very well be if this is a case of psikreisha, then einachinami that may be different. In other words, both say there's a difference between saying if I put on my shoe, the tzaras may come off, and if I put on my shoe, the tzaras will come off. If the tzaras will come off, this is no longer a Davar She'eino Miskavin, but rather again this is a psikreisha. Va'abaye lesle haisvar. Does Abaye not hold that even Rabbi Shimon agrees that psikreisha will be aser? V'ha'abaye v'Rava Darmi Tarbai who molded Rabbi Shimon psikreisha v'lo yamos. But yet Abaye and Rava both said that Rabbi Shimon agrees that where there is a psikreisha, it will be aser. To which the Gemara says, "Lebasar deshame me Rava." Einachinami Abaye changed his position, but only after he heard from Rava. Good. So we'll say I'm sorry. So lebasar deshame me Rava savra. Good. So we'll say so. This just happens to be very interesting that this is indeed the halacha, but just by tzaras, Rambam codifies this lahalacha, which is this interesting notion that although there is a biblical prohibition to do anything to remove a tzaras lesion from your body, you're not allowed to do that. But again, if in the course of the performance of your normal daily, you're not obligated to cease and desist from engaging in your normative daily activities of life, even if they may result in the removal of a tzaras lesion. It's really quite fascinating. So again, I don't have to not put on my shoes if putting on my shoes is going to go ahead and remove the tzaras lesion. It's really quite fascinating. Rabbi Shimon, hi basar my avele. So according to Rabbi Shimon, what does he do with the phrase basar by Mila? So the Gemara says, Amrlei, Rav Amram, ba'omer lakutz be'arasahu miskavin. What's the case? We'll say it's actually incredible. What happens? He uses the lashon of basar for the following case. Let's say an individual is uncircumcised, and it happens to be that he has tzaras on his makom milah, and he tells them all, I want you to give me a bris milah because I want you to remove the tzaras. So he says it. He doesn't know how to. I just want to give it. I have been uncircumcised for who knows how long. I've finally decided I'm going to get a bris milah, but not because I want the bris milah, because I want the tzaras off my body. Halacha l'maisa, you can do the milah. Because what does the pasuk say? Basar. And Basar says you could remove the foreskin no matter what is on it. To which the Gemara says, that's fine. Teinach gadol. So that's an interesting case with an adult, an uncircumcised adult. However, says the Gemara, Teinach gadol, katan ma'ikla mimar. But I will say again, what does Basar teach me in the context of a baby, of a child? Amar Misharshia ba'omer avia ben lakutz beheres dibno I'm sorry. Ba'omer avia ben lakutz beheres dibno hu kamachavin. Supposed to listen to this. What's the case? What does Basar teach me? Let's say there's a baby. And the baby 8 years old about to have the milah. The father's in. The father says to them all, you know what, I don't care about bris milah. I'm happy for this kid. Let him decide on his own when he gets older what he wants to be. But I want you to remove the foreskin because I want the tzaras off my kid's body. So even if the father explicitly says that his kavanah for the bris is not the bris, but his kavanah for the bris is what? For the removal of tzaras, halacha l'maisa, you're still allowed to do the milah. It's pretty incredible. V'i ka'acher le'aved acher. So this is actually very interesting. However, if there is someone other than the father to kind of be there, it's better to get someone other than the father. And as we'll say, as much as you can still do the bris, even if it's the father's clear intention that he's doing this bris not because he cares about the mitzvah, but because he wants the tzaras off his kid's body, you can still do the mitzvah, you can still go ahead and do the bris milah, but better to kind of remove the father from the picture during the bris. Look at Rashi. V'i ka'acher she'ena choshesh letaro le'avid acher v'lo leiku av lahasam. So again, interestingly enough, Rashi, the Gemara says, but better to remove the father. Maybe don't have the father present by the bris milah. You could do the bris, even though it's the explicit intention of the father to remove the tzaras, not even to remove the arla, but to remove the tzaras. Probably better not to have the father there. Interesting. The Gemara says, Adam Rab Shimon Lakish Kamakom Shata Motzi Aseh Velo Saseh, because Moshe Lakish says, any time that you find an aseh and a lo saseh, Im Ata Yachal Lekayim Shnehem Mutav, if you have the ability to maintain both the aseh and the lo saseh, the positive commandment and the prohibition, that is best. Ve'im lav yavo aseh v'yitcha lo saseh. So ultimately, again, but lamaisa, if not, an aseh is docha lo saseh. To which the Gemara says, enachinami deleka acher, where there is no one other than the father. So I will say, so this is actually very interesting. What the Gemara says as follows. So let's say the father is going to circumcise his son, because after all, again, the mitzvah of milah is on the father. At least before the child reaches bar mitzvah. So the child's going to circumcise his son, and he picks up the knife, and he says, hineni muchan u'mezuman, to remove tzaras from my child's body. So I'll say, if he does that, okay, it's not good, but lamaisa, you can still do the bris milah under those circumstances. The Gemara just says, because we know that his kavanah is to remove the tzaras, lamaisa, if you could get someone else to do the milah, that would be highly preferable. But if you can't, such a milah is still unequivocally permitted. Good. Amar Mar, Yom Tevin Adocha, Ela Bizmana Bilvad. So also remember again, we said before, that a milah, when we say milah is docha Shabbos, milah is docha Yom Tiv, that's only a milah bizmana, an 8th day bris, right? But again, lamaisa, if the bris has been delayed for some reason, then halacha lamaisa, that type of milah is not docha Shabbos, not docha Yom Tiv. So minahani mili, from where do I know this? Amar Chizkiah, v'chintana de Bechizkiah, Amar Kra, lo sosiru mimenu ad boker. So let's listen to this. We learned it out, interestingly enough, from Karim Pesach. Shein Talmud Lomar, ad boker, ma Talmud Lomar ad boker, ba kosov litin lo boker shein l'sreifaso. So we'll say, interestingly enough, the drush over here is that any leftover Karim Pesach you have to burn. But when do you burn it? You burn it ultimately, again, not on the first day Yom Tiv, right? Not on the first morning, but rather, again, you burn it on the second morning, which is really the second day of Yom Tiv. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? Look at Rashi for just a moment. So Rashi says over here, if you look at the end, it's Rashi Divrei HaMaschil Shein Talmud Lomer Ad Boker. So the Gemara says, if you look at the end of that Rashi, Ela Boker Sheini Shucholo Shamoy Tisrafenu Aval B'Yom Tov Lo Alma Midi Dechol Lo Avdinan B'Yom Tov. So we'll say, what you see from here is as follows, that Lamaisa, we don't burn the Karban Pesach, we don't burn the leftovers on Yom Tov itself. Why? Because again, Karban Pesach is saying that was shechted during the week. It's called the Midi Dechol. So you see a Midi Dechol, you don't go ahead and do on Yom Tov. There was, interestingly enough, a bris milah, once you're past the 8th day, that doesn't have to be done on Yom Tov. Therefore, again, it's not called something related to Yom Tov or something related to Shabbos. Rather, it's called Midi Dechol. Once it's called Midi Dechol, a weekday activity, it's not Doche Shabbos, not Doche Yom Tov. Abaye says, Amar Kra, Olas Shabbos b'Shabboso, v'lo Olas Chol b'Shabbos, v'lo Olas Chol b'Yom Tov. You could offer up a Shabbos carbon on Shabbos, but not a weekday carbon on Shabbos and not a weekday carbon on Yom Tov. Same idea, I will say. Namely, that once you're past the 8th day, that milah does not have to be done. Or as I will say, which logic would dictate? The only type of bris that is doche Shabbos or doche Yom Tov is an 8th day bris, because the Torah commands that it be done on the 8th day. Once you're past the 8th day, there's nothing imperative about doing the milah more on Shabbos than on a Tuesday. And once there's no imperative to do it more on Shabbos or than on a Tuesday, it's not doche Shabbos, not doche Yom Tov. Rava Amar Kra, Hu levado yaseh lachem. The pasuk by Yom Tov says Hu levado. This is talking about ochel nefesh. It is only ochel nefesh that you are permitted to do on Yom Tov. Hu v'lo machshirav. Hu v'lo machshirin. That teaches me that ochel nefesh only allows for the actual performance of ochel nefesh. You can't do machshirin on Yom Tov. So we'll say, so preparatory acts. So let's say again, I have to go ahead and I want to cook a meal on Yom Tov. I could cook a meal on Yom Tov. But I forgot to chop wood for my stove. I can't chop wood on Yom Tov. That's machshirin. Livado, only this, v'lo milah shelo bizmana. And you can't go ahead and do a milah shelo bizmana on Yom Tov. The asim a kal v'chomer. Ultimately, because I can learn this out from a kal v'chomer. Rav Ashi Amar, so we'll say again, Rashi points out that the kal v'chomer is not necessarily for our purposes now. Rav Ashi Amar, Shabboson asehu, v'havi Yom Tov aseh v'lo saseh, ve'in aseh docha lo saseh v'aseh. Rav Ashi says that Yom Tov, Rav say, is an aseh and a lo saseh, bris milah is an aseh, and as much as we say that aseh docha lo saseh, but aseh, one positive commandment cannot set aside another item that has both a positive commandment and a prohibition. Good. But say, bottom line, everyone's in agreement that milah shelo bizmana, a non-8th day milah, is not doche Shabbos, not doche Yom Tov. Klal Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say Rabbi Akiva. Remember, Rabbi Akiva disagreed in the Mishnah, and Rabbi Akiva held in the Mishnah that what? What was his lashon? His lashon was Klal Rabbi Akiva. Kol malacha shefla la'asosu me'erev Shabbos ino doches Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva said, in general, when it comes to milah, anything which can be done on erev Shabbos is not doches Shabbos. Only those things which cannot be done on erev Shabbos may be done on Shabbos itself. So Rabbi Akiva obviously saying the only thing you could really do on Shabbos is what? The actual circumcision itself. But everything else, which is a preparatory act, must be done prior to Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda, Marav halacha Rabbi Akiva. The halacha follows Rabbi Akiva that milah is mutter on Shabbos, machshirei milah are not mutter on Shabbos. Utnan nami gabi Pesach ki gavna. And also we saw the same thing by Karban Pesach. What do we see by Karban Pesach? The Gemara says, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva, kol malacha she'ef shalal la'asosa me'erev Shabbos ino doches HaShabbos. We'll say again, let's say you have a situation where Erev Pesach falls out on Shabbos. So you have to shech the Karban Pesach then on Erev Pesach, which is Shabbos. But anything that you could have done on Friday, you may not do on Shabbos. However, Shrita, She'ef Shalasos Erev Shabbos, for example, Shrita itself, which could not have been done on Erev Shabbos. We'll say obviously, because remember, the Karban Pesach has to be shechted on Erev Pesach. You can't shecht, that's the 14th of Nisan. You can't shecht it on the 13th of Nisan, which would have been Friday. So again, but you could have sharpened the knife, or you could have brought the knife. So therefore, again, the Gemara says, anything which could have been done on Erev Shabbos must be done on Erev Shabbos. Only the things which cannot be done on Erev Shabbos may be done on Shabbos itself. So shchita, you could check the Korban Pesach, ultimately again on Shabbos. Shi'af, good. Shabbos. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, halacha Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda again says like Rav, that the halacha follows Rabbi Akiva. So both say, so we have two different situations, both Mila and Korban Pesach, where Rabbi Akiva espouses his shita, namely that you could perform the Iker Mitzvah, but the Machshirin must be done prior to Shabbos. So now we have him on record by Mila, we have him on record by Korban Pesach. Utzricha. Now we'll say, now the truth is, why don't he both these cases? Meaning at the end of the day, it's the same concept. Namely, Rabbi Akiva holds, Machshirin cannot be done on Shabbos. Machshirin cannot be done on Shabbos. The mitzvah itself can be that you can shat the Korban Pesach on Shabbos. You can do bris milah on Shabbos, but you may not do machshirei milah on Shabbos. You may not do machshirei Korban Pesach on Shabbos. We'll say it's the same concept. Why do I need both cases? I'll tell you why. I need both. Diashmo inan gabi milah hasam hu de machshirin efshar lasos me esmol lo dachu Shabbos deleka kari. So we'll say, I understand by milah, where Rabbi Akiva would hold that machshirei milah cannot be done on Shabbos. They must be done on Shabbos itself. Why? Because we'll say again, milah is not that chamer. In that what? What happens if there's no bris milah, Rabosai? So there's no bris milah, you've missed out on a mitzvah saseh, but there's no din of kares. Now again, if a man becomes an adult and is uncircumcised, then there's a chi of kares that devolves upon him. But if you don't circumcise an 8-day-old baby, okay, so the father is not performing a mitzvah, that's upon him. But lamaisa, there's no real severity attached to that. That's when I would say you can't do machshirin on Shabbos. Aval Pesach de'ika kares imol litch Shabbos. I will say about Korban Pesach, which is if you don't perform Pesach, there is an Isser Kares. I'm going to thought that because it's so chomer, you can go ahead and do the Machshirin on Shabbos. Therefore, again, Rabbi Akiva says you can't do Machshirin on Shabbos by Pesach either. V'yashmo inon gabe Pesach. And if Rabbi Akiva would have just taught that you can't do Machshirin on Shabbos by Korban Pesach, Mishum delo nichrasu ala yud gimel brisos, because Lamaisa, Pesach doesn't have 13 covenants like Bris Milah has. But again, but Bris Milah, which is so incredible that it has 13 covenants surrounding it, I might have thought that even Machshirei Milah are Docha Shabbos, therefore need both. So we'll say, bottom line, halacha l'maisa, in the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer will allow Machshirei Milah on Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva does not. We paskin halacha l'maisa like Rabbi Akiva. So we paskin that Mila Bismana is Doche Shabbos, Mila Bismana is Doche Yom Tiv, Mila is Doche Tzaras, and that's true. Mila Bismana, Mila Shalom Bismana is Doche Tzaras, but halacha l'maisa is only the Mila itself which is Doche Shabbos. But Machshirei Mila are not Docha Shabbos. So for example, if the mall realizes, oh my gosh, I have no knife, he would not be permitted to go and start forging and creating a new knife for the sake of performing Mila on Shabbos, because that's Machshirei Mila. The Mila is Docha, Machshirin are not. Beautiful. We'll say continuing on Bris Mila. Mishnah says, Osin kol tzarchei Mila b'Shabbos. You can do everything necessary for Mila on Shabbos. So we'll say, we're going to see exactly what the Gemara is trying to convey with this, but you could perform all the different aspects of Mila on Shabbos. For example, Mo'alin, we can circumcise. Porin, Nebose, we'll discuss this. Priya means as follows. After you cut the foreskin, you have to peel it back. That's called Priya, right? That's called Priya. So you peel it back, and that's what reveals the corona, the top of the gid. Motzitzin. And we'll say this is actually really quite interesting. So motzitzin, mitzitza. So we'll say this means the drawing out of blood. Again, what we'll see, Rashi says over here, motzitzin es hadam, va'afagav diasiyas chabura, she'in hadam nitak michibura eladem mitzitza. So we'll say, so this is causing the aver, right, causing the makom mila to bleed. See, interestingly enough, the mole has an obligation. Part of the mila is actively drawing out the blood. And even though, again, this causes additional quote-unquote wounding because you're extracting blood, that's part of the mitzvah of Mila. V'nosin aleh ispalanis, and again, you could go ahead and put on it. And we'll say ispalanis means a bandage, right? So you could put a bandage on the Mila on Shabbos, the kumon. It's actually very interesting. Apparently, what they used to use as like an ointment for the Mila was cumin. It's very interesting. So they would put cumin. You would put cumin on a bandage, and then they would wrap the makom milah. Very interesting. Im lo shachak me'erev Shabbos. If you now, obviously we're talking ground cumin. What happens if you didn't grind the cumin on before Shabbos? Lois b'shina v'nosim. Ultimately, I will say, so there you can't grind it on Shabbos because remember again, grinding is a malacha. Grinding is a malacha, and again that's machshirim. You can't do that on Shabbos. What you can do is chew up the cumin in your mouth and then kind of like take that and put it on the bandage. The Gemara says, "Imlo taraf yain v'shem erev Shabbos." You know, saying zeh b'atzmo v'zeh b'atzmo. Interestingly enough, something else that they would do is they would take wine and oil and they would go ahead and kind of whip it up together. They would mix it and apply that also to the affected area. If you did not make that mixture on Shabbos, so the Mishnah says, so I see the problem of taking wine and oil and whipping it up together. It appears that the Mishnah is saying it has the appearance of cooking. So because it has the appearance of cooking, rabbinically you're not allowed to do it. So therefore, you really should prepare this mixture on Erev Shabbos. If you didn't prepare it on Erev Shabbos, all you need to do is you just can't make it the same way. So you pour in the wine first, you mix it up. You pour in the oil first, and you mix it up. But you can't really mix them together. So the Gemara says, "Ve'ein osin lachaluk lechatchila." You can't make chaluk. Now, I'll say chaluk in this case. We're going to see means. Rashi says, "Ke'ein kis dachel kaya osin." Umabishin es rosh hagid ad hatara, the kosher shnam. So we'll say you can see this. They still do this by milah today, which is after the milah is done. There's a bandage that's wrapped around underneath the top of the aver, to prevent the foreskin from coming back up. So we'll say they call this a chaluk. So they used to have literally chaluk means like a garment. So what they would do is they would slide it over the makom milah to prevent the foreskin from coming up. So you can't go ahead and create this chaluk on Shabbos. Aval korich alav smirtut. But if you don't have the chaluk, you could just bandage it. You could bandage it. Imlo hiskin me'erev Shabbos korich alatzbo movi afilu mechatzer acheres. And if you don't even have a bandage, if you didn't prepare a bandage from before Yom Tiv, from before Shabbos, what can you do? You could wrap it around your finger and just bring it out like that. So wrap it around your finger and transport that. So it was like you do need some type of bandage for the baby. That's a necessity. So although ideally that's machshirin, and you're supposed to prepare that before Shabbos, if for some reason the mole did not bring it with him, what he can do is, as he's traveling, he could wrap that bandage around his finger and essentially transport it like that. Good. So we'll say let's analyze a bit more. So it says the Gemara, Amud Beis, says the Gemara, Michti. Katani kulu kol tzarchei milah la suyemai. So I'll say the Mishnah said you're allowed to do kol tzarchei milah. What does that come to include? Right? What in other words, obviously, whenever you say you could do all the things that's right for milah, that's coming to include. Tell me what it's coming to include. La suyei hadutan rabbanon hamal kol zman shu osek b'milah chozer bo alatitzin hama akvin es hamilah bein alatitzin sheim akvin es hamilah. So listen to this. We're going to discuss this in greater depth, but there are tzitzin. Both say tzitzin are little pieces of flesh. So we're going to see that there are times where, let's say the mole didn't do a totally clean job on the circumcision, and therefore there are some pieces of the arla that are left. So if there are just a few pieces of the other that are left, that does not invalidate the milah. The only time that the milah is invalidated is if the majority of the tip of the corona, of the tip of the aver, ultimately again is covered. Only if it's covered. So at the end of the day, that's what it means when it says tzitzin hama'akvin. If there are tzitzin, literally means like pieces. If there are pieces of the foreskin that invalidate the milah. So watch this. So now let's read this again. So the Gemara says, as long as you're actively engaged in bris milah, you can go back and you could clean up the milah as much as you want. In other words, whether that is tzitzin hama'akvin or tzitzin she'inon ma'akvin. Piresh. But once the moel is done, literally, again, he's removed his hand. Then al tzitzin hama'akvin es hamilah chozer. He can go back and clean up any of the tzitzin which would invalidate the milah. However, al tzitzin she'in ma'akvin es hamilah eino chozer. But ultimately, again, for tzitzin, for pieces of foreskin that are not ma'akiv, that really don't go ahead and invalidate the milah, that you can't go. So I'll say it's actually very interesting. So essentially, as long as the moel is actively engaged in the milah, he could clean up whatever he wants, even if it's not necessary for the mitzvah. Once he finishes, he can go back if he realizes that there's something that negates the effectiveness of the milah. But if there's something that's there that doesn't negate the effectiveness of the milah, he can't go on. Once you're done, this is talking about Shabbos, once you're done, you can only go back for stuff that's absolutely necessary. But for things, I guess, that'd be more cosmetic, I guess, you can't go back. So the Gemara says, Man Tana Piresh Ina Choser. Who is the Tana that says, once the moel finished, he can't go back for things. He can't go back for tzitzin that are not ma'akvin. So Amara Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yochanan, Baroka. He wrote the first wide line. Bisanya, Arba Shechalios B'Shabbos. If the 14th of Nisan Erev Pesach falls on Shabbos, Mafshit Adam HaPesach Ad HaChozeh. So you could go ahead and flay your korban Pesach up until the chest. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael Beno Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. These are Rabbi Shmuel and Chum say no mafshitin eskulo. No, Chum say you can actually go ahead and flay the entire animal. So we'll say, what do you see from here? See, Rabbi Shmuel ben Baroka, Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka essentially says once you flay it till the chest, that allows you to remove any of the necessary internal organs for hakrava on the mizbeach. Once you do that, you've done what you need to do. So to go back now is going back and doing something that is not really necessary anymore. So you see Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says that on Shabbos, once you remove your hand, you can only go back and do that which is necessary. But if it's unnecessary, you can't go. So too by Milah, if the mol quote unquote finished, and then he realized, there's still some tzitz in there, right? There's still some pieces of the foreskin. So again, if they are ma'akiv, then he could go back. If they're not ma'akiv, he can't go back. To which the Gemara says, I don't know, it's not really a good comparison. So I will say, maybe he only says by korban Pesach, because by korban Pesach, there is no din of hider mitzvah. Right? You don't have to beautify the way that you shecht the animal. You just have to shecht it. Aval hachar, we'll say, is actually quite amazing. By bris milah, we'll say, it's actually incredible. There's a din of hider mitzvah, beautifying the mitzvah, by bris milah. Really quite fascinating. So the Gemara says, this sanya, zekili vanveyu. What does it mean? It says, literally translated, this is my God and I will exalt him. Hisna elefana b'mitzvos. It means, beautify your performance of mitzvos in the presence of Hashem. Aseh lefanav sukkah noah. Make a beautiful sukkah. Lulav noah, a beautiful lulav. Shofar noah, a beautiful shofar. Tzitzis noah, a beautiful tzitzis. Sefer Torah noah, a beautiful sefer Torah. V'kaseb al l'shmo. Bidyo noah. Go ahead and write it l'shmo. Write it with nice ink. Bekomos, a nice quill. Belavlar, uman, a good sofer. Karcho, be sure and wrap it in silk. So we'll say, what do you see from here? It could, there's a concept of hidra mitzvah. And hidra mitzvah means don't just do a mitzvah, but do a mitzvah in the most beautiful way possible. Bris milah is governed by the same concept of hidra mitzvah. You'll say, what does that mean? What kind of hidra mitzvah is there in bris milah? Very simple. That if the more left over tzitzin, if there are still some pieces of foreskin that are left there, even if they're not ma'akiv, even if they do not negate the milah, there may be the concept ultimately of going back and removing them in order to quote unquote beautify the mitzvah. Such a concept like that doesn't apply in the shchita or the flaying of a korban Pesach. Just as an aside, Abba Shaul Omer va'an vehu. What does it mean va'an vehu? Have a domelo. It means to resemble God, divine emulation. So we'll say, according to Abba Shaul, he understands Zekili, this is my God, va'anveyu, and I will emulate him. How do you get emulation from anveyu? Rashi says anveyu is a contraction. Ani v'hu. Ani v'hu. I will be like my Creator. Mahu rachum v'chanun. Mahu chanun v'rachum. Af ata chanun v'rachum. Just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu was compassionate, so too you have to be compassionate. Allah Amar Avashi Hamani. So whose opinion does this reflect? Rabbi Yosihi. So we'll say, we're trying to figure out this concept that if the moel, quote unquote, finished the milah, and then he realizes that there are still some pieces of the arla that are there. So again, if those pieces if they negate the effectiveness of the milah, he can go back and remove them. But lamaisa, if they don't if they don't impact the effectiveness of the milah, he can't go back. So whose opinion does this reflect? To which the Gemara says, Amar Avashi Hamani Rabbi Yosihi, this nan, Ben Shenira Ba'ala, Ben Shelo Nira Ba'ala, Mechalan Lavas HaShabbos. So this actually is the Kiddush HaChodesh. So we'll say, remember again, witnesses see the new moon, they have to come to Yerushalayim, and to go ahead and give testimony that they saw the new moon. So the Mishnah says, whether the moon is clear or not clear, witnesses shall say, in other words, you might have thought that Allah Lamaisa, if the moon is clearly observable, there's no need for witnesses to go in and start being Mechalo Shabbos and traveling, because if the witnesses here could see it clearly, everyone else could see it clearly as well. To which the Mishnah says, no. Even if the moon is absolutely clear, you still halacha lamaisa have to go on Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Nira Ba'alil, Ein Mechalin Lavasa Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi says, no, not true. If it's clear, in other words, if the moon could be seen clearly, so therefore, just as the witnesses saw it, everyone else saw it as well, halacha lamaisa not Mechalo Shabbos for that. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that Rabbi Yossi says that halacha lamaisa. Look at Rashi. Rabbi Yossi Omer alma afagav the ika mitzvah kevan to lav l'tzarach kavohu lo mechalina. So we really see that according to Rabbi Yossi, even though again it's good for witnesses to go, if it's not necessary, not mechal Shabbos. So too, if the mole finished the milah, but he sees that there are still some pieces of skin there, if it's not ma'akiv, if it's not necessary, he's not permitted to do it. To which the Gemara says, "Mimai." Shabbos litchos. So we'll say it's different because by the witnesses, remember again, there's no real license to be mechal Shabbos under those. Chazal asked you to do something for the benefit of maintaining the calendar. Aval hacha de nitna Shabbos litchos hachinami. But I will say by milah. We have it, it's institutionalized Chilul Shabbos, so to speak. In other words, Mila Rabosai by definition sets aside Shabbos. So it's possible that even for tzitzin she'inan ma'akvin, the sofer, I keep saying the sofer, the mole should be able to go back. Elamrin Ardai, Rabbanan de Pli Yaled Rabbi Yossi. Rather than Ardaim say, who is it? It's the Rabbanan who argue on Rabbi Yossi. This not, here we go, Both is incredible. Arba Kohanim Nichnasin. Both is talking about the Seder for the Lechem Apanim. 4 Kohanim go into the Beis HaMikdash. Shnayim biyadam shnei sedarim, ushnayim biyadam shnei bazichim. So we'll say ultimately 4 Kohanim go in. 2 are holding the bread. 2 are holding the 2 stacks of bread. This is the new lechem apanim. This is on Shabbos. So 2 are holding the 2 stacks of bread, and 2 more are each holding a spoon of frankincense. Levona. Varba makdim lefeim. There are 4 other Kohanim who are already inside of the Beis HaMikdash. Shnayim litol shnei sedarim. 2 Kohanim there, 1 each to remove a stack of bread. Remember, they're removing the quote-unquote old bread from the shulchan. Ushnayim litol shnei bazichin, and 2 to remove the 2 spoons of frankincense. So we'll say this is the shift. So this is all happening on Shabbos. Remember, Shabbos they would replace the lechem upon him. So 4 Kohanim bringing in the new, 4 Kohanim taking out the old. 2 Kohanim, 1 each holding a stack of bread. 2 Kohanim each holding a spoon of frankincense. Watch this. Hamachnisim omdim b'tzafon u'pneim l'daram. Those coming in stand in the north with their face to the south. Hamotziin omdim l'daram pneim l'tzafon. The ones who are taking out the old stand in the south with their faces to the north. Elu moshchim ve'elu manichin. And I will say everything happens almost like simultaneously. The Kohanim take out called Group A removes the old, while Group B immediately places in the new. So the Gemara says, Tafchu shalzeh, b'tzat tafchu shalzeh. The hands of this one are right near the hands of the others. Rabbi say it is a immediate simultaneous process. As the old is being removed, the new is being put there. Why the need for the simultaneity? Mishum shenemar lifnei Hashem tamid. Because the pasuk says that the lechem must be on the shulchan tamid, constantly, consistently, without interruption. Rabbi Yossi Omer, afilu elu notlin ve'elu manichin, af zeh hayatamid. Rabbi Yossi says, no, it's not true. Even if we'll say tamid just means, according to Rabbi Yossi, that halacha l'maisa, the shulchan can't remain overnight without lechem. But it doesn't have to have that level of simultaneity. Look at Rashi for just a moment. It's about 6-7 lines down on the Y lines of Rashi. Avzet Tamid. Omani mekayim Tamid shlo yolin shulchan below lechem. Ul rabbani shal b'shavki v'hader mesaji lo mikri lu Tamid elas chalach risi. V'nimtza shemes akiv shulchan below lechem. V'gabe pirish nami ki hader asi milsach risi. Ha'il Rabbi Yossi damar ki shavki v'hader maschili nami Tamid dechada milsuhu. Ha'chen nami pirish chozer afa pi she'in ma'akvin to kula gemar milsi. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Rabbi Yossi would be of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, even after the moel finished, he's still permitted to go ahead and go back, even for the tzitzin she'enan ma'akvin. Why? because it's all part of the same process. So I will say what Rabbi Yossi essentially says is that halacha l'maisa, something is still called part of the same process, even if there's a little bit of an interruption. I will have to stop over here for today. We'll in Mir Hashem pick up with this in Mir Hashem tomorrow.